You know when you glance at your daily horoscope and maybe just kind of dismiss it as a bit of modern fun? Well, what we're going to do today is take this grand historical journey to uncover the surprisingly deep, complex, and, well, scientific past of that very idea. So, a lot of people think of astrology as this lightweight superstition, right? A kind of recent trend for people who are into crystals and stuff. But what if I told you that is completely, fundamentally wrong?
Because the truth is, for most of human history, astrology wasn't just some belief system. Oh no. It was a rigorous, mathematically driven technology. It was the thing that was driving the development of astronomy, of timekeeping, and even medicine. It was the engine.
Okay, so our story, it doesn't start in the 20th century. It starts more than 3,000 years ago in the ancient Near East. This is where two incredible civilizations looked up at the sky for totally different reasons, but together they laid the foundation for everything, and I mean everything that came after. So, get this. In Mesopotamia, astrology wasn't about your personal life. It was a technology of the state, for the king. And for almost 2,000 years, it just kept evolving. First, you had scribes who meticulously compiled thousands of these celestial omens. Then they got even more systematic. They started keeping these detailed astronomical diaries, writing down everything they saw. And all that data, that massive database, it led to this absolutely revolutionary invention around 410 BCE, the zodiac, a 360-degree mathematical grid that they just stamped right onto the sky. What's so wild is how their system worked. It was all about this strict logical format. An if-then statement. You had the protasis, that's the if, the thing you see in the sky, and then you had the apodosis, the then, the prediction for the kingdom. This wasn't some vague mystical prophecy. It was a structured, data-driven system for reading divine messages. But at the same time, while the Mesopotamians were busy tracking the moving planets, they called them the wild sheep of the sky, which is just great. The Egyptians were obsessed with something else entirely, the fixed, predictable stars. For them, the sky wasn't a warning system. It was a giant, divine clock, ticking away time for the living and for the dead. And this is where you really see their genius for organizing time. The Egyptians gave us the Decans, these 36 star groups that marked out 10-day weeks. They would paint these things on the inside of coffin lids as star clocks, so you could tell time in the underworld. And for daily life, they created these calendars of lucky and unlucky days. Eventually, these two systems collided, and you get things like the famous Dendera zodiac, which is this beautiful physical fusion of the Egyptian stellar clock and the Babylonian planetary zodiac. Okay, this brings us to the most critical turning point in the whole story. We're in the city of Alexandria, in Egypt, around the 2nd century BCE. It's this incredible melting pot of cultures, and it's here that Babylonian math and Egyptian timekeeping get fused with Greek philosophy to create something totally new, something that would change the world, the personal horoscope. You see, the Babylonians had a brilliant system. They could tell you that when you were born, Jupiter was in the constellation of the Bull. I mean, that's a huge achievement, but it was still kind of general. It wasn't really about you. But then the Greeks came along with their obsession with geometry and the individual, and they asked a much more precise question, a much more personal one. They wanted to know what precise degree of the zodiac was physically rising up over the eastern horizon at the exact time and place you were born. And that question changed everything. And the answer was the ascendant, or horoskopos in Greek. It literally means hour marker. This one idea was a technological revolution. It created a personalized starting point for the whole sky. It locked the vast, impersonal cosmos into a specific moment on Earth. And in doing so, it created the framework for the 12 houses that astrologers still use today to talk about different parts of your life. And this wasn't just some clever math trick, right? It had this incredibly powerful philosophical idea powering it. The Stoic idea of sympatheia, cosmic sympathy, the belief that the universe isn't a machine, it's a single interconnected living being. So what happens way up there in the heavens must be reflected down here in a single human life. It all fits together. So now you've got this incredibly powerful new technology, the horoscope. And of course, something this good isn't going to stay in one place. It begins this remarkable journey, spreading east into India, and then, later, it gets preserved and polished to a high shine in the great intellectual centers of the Islamic world. Now, how do we know it's spread? Well, this is the really cool part. It's like detective work. We can find these linguistic fossils, Greek technical terms that were just lifted wholesale and dropped right into Sanskrit. The Indian word for the ascendant, Hora, comes directly from the Greek hora. The word for a decan, drekana, comes from Decanas. This isn't a coincidence. It's the fingerprint of a massive technology transfer. But, history's never quite that simple, is it? For a long time, the main theory was that this was just a huge one-time knowledge dump around 149 CE. But now, newer scholarship is suggesting it was probably a much more complex, gradual process that took centuries, with Indian thinkers actively taking these new ideas and weaving them into their own traditions. So, as the Roman Empire begins to crumble in the West, the intellectual center of the world shifts. For hundreds of years, it was the scholars in Baghdad's legendary House of Wisdom who became the librarians of the ancient world. They translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts, and they didn't just preserve them. They synthesized them, they refined them, they made the system even better. All right, our journey is now coming full circle. It's time to go back to Europe, where this incredible body of knowledge would return, sparking an intellectual renaissance and reaching its absolute peak in the hands of one particular master, right before things started to change. So, through contact with the Islamic world, especially in Spain, European scholars in places like Toledo started this massive project. They began translating all these advanced texts from Arabic back into Latin, and astrology was reborn in Europe, not as some folk superstition, but as a core subject in the new universities. It was considered absolutely essential for practicing medicine. You couldn't be a doctor without it. And here's a perfect real-world example of how this technology was actually used. It's 1643. The famous English astrologer William Lilly gets asked a question: is the rumor true that the king's forces have taken Cambridge? Now, he doesn't guess. He treats it like a technical problem. He casts a chart for the exact moment he was asked the question. He looks at the chart, sees a key technical indicator. The moon is void of course, which in his rulebook meant the situation was stagnant. Nothing was going to happen. So he confidently declares the rumor is false. And you know what? He was right. This was applied, methodical work. So let's just step back for a second. We have traced a single idea across 3,000 years and multiple continents, from state-level omens in ancient Babylon all the way to a global technology of the self. It's time to pull all these threads together. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really puts the sheer scale of this history into perspective, doesn't it? It is a continuous chain of transmission and innovation. From the first omen tablets, to the invention of the zodiac, to the personal horoscope, to its synthesis in the Islamic world, its absolute peak in early modern Europe, and now even its revival in our own time. And if you need that one single knockout piece of proof that this was one system spreading across the globe, not just popping up independently, it's this: the number 3 to 2. That is the mathematical ratio of the longest day to the shortest day at the latitude of Babylon. And this exact number shows up in Greek and Indian texts, where geographically it makes no sense. It's like finding a little piece of mathematical DNA, a tracer element that proves exactly where it came from. So really, it all comes down to this. For centuries, the need to cast accurate horoscopes is what drove the development of math. The need to predict where the planets would be is what funded astronomy. So to ignore astrology's role in the history of science, it isn't just missing a piece of the story. It's like trying to tell the story of a car, but you've taken out the engine first. And that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. Right now, today, scholars and practitioners are translating these ancient texts and reviving the exact techniques we've been talking about. So the question isn't just about the past. It's about whether we, in our modern world, are simply rediscovering a sophisticated, lost technology for mapping our own lives against the backdrop of the cosmos.